Welcome to Swadharma IAS Academy. Today we are diving deep into one of the most critical geopolitical issues for your UPSC preparation, the India-Nepal border dispute.
Absolutely. And for your mains preparation, specifically, General Studies Paper 2 encompassing international relations, and, well, GS Paper 3 focusing on internal security and border management and understanding the mechanics behind this dispute it's totally non-negotiable for you.
Yeah, because we're looking at a situation where a historically open, really frictionless boundary has suddenly mutated into this highly combustible flashpoint.
Right. You're analyzing a boundary that for decades operated under the 1950 Peace and Friendship Treaty. I mean, this established the famous Roti-Beti
The ties of food and marriage, right?
Exactly. It's a unique relationship where citizens cross, they work freely without passports over a 1,751-kilometer open border.
Wow, yeah. Across 5 Indian states, right? Like
Right.
Uttarakhand, UP, Bihar, West Bengal, and Sikkim.
Correct. But despite those deep ties, the diplomatic tone between New Delhi and Kathmandu has recently grown extraordinarily tense. And as an aspiring administrator, you need to cut through the recent political noise. You have to evaluate the structural drivers of this dispute and, importantly, maintain a balanced diplomatic tone in your answers.
Definitely. No hyper-nationalism in the mains exam, guys. Keep it analytical.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this structural driver because it always seems to go back to colonial history, right? I always tell people, how do you lose a river?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, you look at the end of the Anglo-Nepalese War in 1814 to 1816 and the resulting treaty, like a Treaty of Sugauli. And the fundamental flaw there is that it treated a highly complex, ecological system as just this static geometric line on a map.
It's the classic cartographic legacy left behind by the British. Article 5 of the Treaty of Sugauli designated the Kali River, which is known as the Mahakali in Nepal, as the western boundary between India and Nepal.
Right, so everything west is India and everything east is Nepal. Sounds simple enough, right?
It reads as a definitive solution, sure, until you actually look at the topographical reality of the high Himalayas. British cartographers just drew a line without comprehensively defining the catchment area.
Yeah, because a river up there doesn't just, pop out of a single spring that you can point to.
No, not at all. It's a complex dendritic system. It's a hierarchy of mountain streams and tributaries that converge over miles and miles of rugged terrain. The Treaty of Sugauli explicitly named the Kali River, but critically, it failed to state which specific tributary constituted the river's exact geographic origin point.
And that one oversight, that lack of topographic precision, is the exact mechanism driving the whole territorial claim over the Kalapani-Lipulekh-Limpiyadhura triangle today.
Spot on. It's the root cause.
So to break down the two stances for the listeners, India operates on the cartographic logic that the river originates from a smaller eastern stream near Panthagarh or Kalapani. Meaning, if you follow that specific eastern channel as the boundary, the 370 square kilometer triangle to the west is firmly within India's Uttarakhand state.
Exactly. But then Nepal, looking at that exact same watershed, argues that the true source is actually the much larger westernmost stream originating at Limpiyadhura.
Right, so if you draw the boundary from that western point, the entire Kalapani-Lipulekh-Limpiyadhura triangle just shifts right into Nepalese territory.
Yeah, it's essentially a 200-year-old argument over tributary hierarchies.
But wait, framing this merely as a 200-year-old cartographic oversight feels, I don't know, a bit naive, doesn't it? I mean, why is this suddenly causing modern diplomatic crises right now?
Well, you have to look at the 2019 and 2020 map controversies.
Ah, right. The J&K bifurcation.
Yes. In 2019, India published new political maps after bifurcating Jammu and Kashmir. Now, these maps didn't actually change the external boundary with Nepal, but they provided Kathmandu with a political opening to formalize the dormant grievance.
And Nepal retaliated by actually amending their constitution, right? They officially published a new map absorbing that disputed triangle and even printed it on their currency.
Exactly. It was a deliberate, weaponized political escalation. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to ask why neither side is willing to concede this patch of really harsh, barren Himalayan terrain.
Yeah, it's not exactly prime real estate for farming.
No, it's not about rocks and snow. It is about the trijunction.
Trijunction with China.
Yes, the trijunction, where the borders of India, Nepal, and the Tibetan Autonomous Region of China converge. The military geography there completely shifts the strategic calculus for India.
Right, especially since the 1962 Sino-Indian War.
Precisely. India recognized back then that high elevation provides an irreplaceable asymmetric advantage. The Kalapani region, and specifically the Lipulekh Pass, offers commanding topographic dominance.
So it's about observation. It's a vantage point.
It's a critical observation post. It's currently secured by the ITBP, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police. And from up there, India has a clear, unobstructed line of sight over the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, activities across the Tibetan Plateau.
Wow. Okay, so yielding control of that tri-junction would effectively blind India's northern security apparatus.
Exactly. It would compromise the strategic depth that is absolutely necessary to defend the Gangetic Plains.
That makes sense. But what really complicates this highly militarized zone is that it directly overlaps with one of the most sacred cultural and religious routes in the region.
Right, the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra.
Exactly. The route traverses directly through the Lipulekh Pass. And we really have to factor in the impending July 2026 Yatra, because 2026 is not just a standard pilgrimage year.
No, it's astrologically massive.
Yeah. According to Tibetan and Hindu astrological cycles, 2026 marks the fire horse, or the Agni Ashwa year, which is this really rare alignment that only happens once every 60 years.
And for your UPSC context, you need to understand the logistical nightmare this creates. The traditional belief is that a single circumambulation, a parikrama, of Mount Kailash during the Agni Ashwa year yields the spiritual merit of 12 standard journeys.
Oh, 12! That's incredible. So it guarantees an absolute massive surge in pilgrims trying to make the trek.
A historic surge.
Yeah.
India is anticipating unprecedented numbers.
And to manage that, the Border Roads Organization did something kind of amazing, right? They built an 80-kilometer motorable road straight up to the Lipulekh Pass.
Yes, they did.
Which is a logistical triumph. I mean, previously, pilgrims had to endure this grueling, highly dangerous 1,738-kilometer trek. Now, because of this road, they only have to walk about 38 kilometers.
It is an engineering marvel, absolutely. But looking at this through an international relations lens, it was a profound diplomatic flashpoint.
Yeah, because we essentially blasted a highway street through a politically sensitive, disputed zone.
And we celebrated its inauguration publicly.
Right. It seems like South Bloc just expected Kathmandu to look the other way because it served a religious purpose.
But the anger from Nepal was entirely predictable. To understand their fury over this infrastructure shift, you have to look back at 2015.
Okay, what happened in 2015?
India and China signed a bilateral trade and transit agreement, specifically utilizing the Lipulekh Pass.
Oh, wow. And they didn't include Nepal.
Exactly. Kathmandu fiercely protested. They argued that two regional powers were actively making commercial agreements over what Nepal considers its sovereign territory, completely bypassing them.
So then, when India builds the Pilgrim Road through that exact same disputed corridor years later,
Nepal views it not as a nice logistical upgrade for pilgrims, but as a severe territorial violation, a unilateral consolidation of control.
Man, treating a mountain river as a static political line just causes absolute chaos.
It really does, especially when the original map makers lacked any real detail.
But, that vulnerability of natural borders gets infinitely worse when we completely shift gears. Let's transition from the high Himalayas down to the plains of Bihar, specifically the West Champaran district.
Ah, yes. The Susta dispute.
Right, because here we're looking at a completely different kind of border issue. It's like the border literally got up and walked away.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. For the listeners, the scientific mechanism driving the border conflict in Susta is a concept you must explicitly reference in your GS Paper 3 answers. It's called fluvial geomorphology.
Right, the science of the border. Because we have to think of a river in the plains, in this case the Gandak River, which is the Narayani in Nepal, not as a drawn line on a map, but almost like a violently swinging pendulum.
Exactly. During the monsoon season, the Gandak carries an immense sediment load.
Yeah, and as that sediment builds up on one bank, it aggressively pushes the water into the opposite direction. It erodes the other bank and carves an entirely new channel.
Which means the natural boundary itself moves. Over decades, the Gandak River has constantly changed its course, migrating miles from where it originally flowed.
And that creates just a massive headache for the people living there, right? I mean, you have Indian and Nepalese farmers who have lived in the exact same spot for generations, and suddenly they wake up and the river that used to be to their east is now to their west.
It's staggering. Geographically, their sovereign land is now sitting on the wrong side of the river's flow.
So they are farming in another country, essentially.
Yes. This constant shifting creates a deeply complex web known as cross-holding occupation.
Cross-holding occupation, okay.
It's important to note that this is not an issue of malicious military encroachment. It's an ecological phenomenon rewriting the map. Reconciling century-old land deeds with the localized impacts of fluvial geomorphology is a major administrative crisis.
Right, but while Susta represents this crazy ecological challenge, the temperature of the broader border dispute overall is currently being dictated by something else entirely, isn't it? A big demographic and political shift in Kathmandu.
Yes, the Balendra Shah factor.
Yeah, let's talk about the provocateur himself.
Sure.
Nepal's new Prime Minister, Balendra Shah. I mean, he's only 36 years old. He's the former mayor of Kathmandu.
And he represents a younger demographic that simply does not share that nostalgic historical deference to the Roti-Beti Rishta that older generations might have.
Yeah, he's totally catering to this anti-establishment, youth-driven voter base where, let's be honest, aggressive posturing against India is guaranteed political currency.
Precisely. Remember when he was mayor, he placed a Greater Nepal map in his office.
Oh, right. Claiming modern Indian territory as historically Nepalese.
Yes, and that was a direct, calculated counter to the Akan Farhat mural that was placed in India's new parliament building.
It's just aggressive nationalist signaling for domestic consumption. But it goes beyond just maps and offices now, right? I mean, he dropped a massive diplomatic bomb recently.
You're referring to his unprecedented parliamentary speech.
Exactly. He stood up and claimed that both sides have encroached on each other's territory, and then he actively demanded that the United Kingdom intervene to mediate the border dispute.
Right, demanding British intervention to access old colonial archives.
Yeah.
But we have to analyze why a modern leader wants colonial-era intervention.
I mean, it feels like a Trojan horse tactic. He knows the UK isn't actually going to step in to mediate a South Asian border conflict in 2026.
No, of course not. The invocation to the UK is purely a rhetorical stepping stone. By demanding mediation publicly, he serves to internationalize what India insists is a strictly bilateral issue.
So if the UK is just a stepping stone, what's the actual leverage here?
The actual geopolitical leverage empowering Kathmandu's hardline stance is the China factor.
Ah, right. Beijing.
Yes. Over the past decade, Beijing has systematically integrated Nepal into its Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. They are funding massive trans-Himalayan infrastructure projects, dry ports, communication networks, you name it.
And we really need to emphasize to the listeners how that Chinese infrastructure fundamentally alters the diplomatic power dynamic here.
How so?
Well, historically, India held an absolute undisputed monopoly over Nepal's transit and trade. Because Nepal is landlocked, right? India was practically its only viable gateway to the global economy.
That's true. The geography locked them in.
But Chinese engineering physically breaks that transit monopoly. By carving these new logistical arteries through the Himalayas, Beijing is economically empowering Nepal.
Exactly. That structural shift provides Kathmandu with the geoeconomic confidence to assert a much more hardline, strategically autonomous stance against India. They don't have that immediate fear of a crippling economic blockade anymore.
Which puts immense stress on India's diplomatic stance, right?
Yeah.
Especially the Gujral Doctrine.
Yes, the Gujral Doctrine is a crucial concept here. Formulated in the late 1990s, it prioritizes a neighborhood-first approach based on non-reciprocal accommodation.
Meaning India offers concessions and builds infrastructure for its smaller neighbors without demanding equal favors in return.
Right, the goal was to build long-term trust. But, as you pointed out, the limits of the Gujral Doctrine are glaringly obvious today. Non-reciprocal accommodation works brilliantly when you are the undisputed hegemon and your neighbors have no other options.
Right. But when China is actively offering a highly lucrative, competing geoeconomic model right next door.
India's reliance on historical goodwill is severely tested, which is exactly why India enforces a rigid, absolute red line regarding border sovereignty.
Complete adherence to bilateral resolution, right?
Strictly bilateral. India's policy is that there will be absolutely zero third-party interference. No UK, no United Nations, and certainly no China. Permitting external mediation is viewed as an unacceptable surrender of sovereign borders.
So the message to Balendra Shah is essentially, look, we'll honor the open border, but you have to leave your new geopolitical allies outside the room when we discuss Kalapani.
Exactly. It's a high-stakes diplomatic tightrope.
It really is. It perfectly illustrates how multidimensional international relations can be. You have a colonial mapmaker's mistake in 1816, creating a military flashpoint in 2026, and all of it is being supercharged by a modern superpower's infrastructure.
It is fascinating. And before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought for your own exploration.
Oh, I love these. What is it?
Well, we just analyzed how erratic river dynamics continually disrupt the Susta region today. But as climate change drastically accelerates the melting of Himalayan glaciers, we are guaranteed to see a massive increase in the erratic flooding of rivers like the Gandak.
Wow, yeah, the water volume is going to surge.
Exactly. So the question is, how many more settled international boundaries will be erased or entirely redrawn by the violent forces of fluvial geomorphology over the next decade?
Oh, man. That is a chilling strategic reality to think about. That's definitely going to redefine border management for a long time. Well, if you found this deep dive geopolitical analysis helpful for your preparation, please don't forget to like this video, share it with your fellow aspirants, and subscribe to Swadharma IAS Academy for more premium UPSC content. Study hard, stay focused, and Jai Hind.